Right. Okay, I'm going to give you a moment just to kind of get back to me. My apologies for that. It's not the professional professional look I like to give. All right, there we are. So I've got you back up on my iPad. I can hopefully see what you can see. I can see this needs altering just a little bit so you can see more of my desk and less of my jumper. Hopefully we're there. Okay. Move it slightly that way. All right. So Joyfold cards then. Oh no, before Joyfold cards, let me put that there. I promised you that, didn't I? So for next week on Wednesday, when the online exclusive things are launched, you will be able to see them on my website here. It's not a difficult one to remember, fortunately. Right, now I'm going to do Joyfold cards. So what is a Joyfold card? A Joyfold card is essentially 2 cards in one, which is one of the reasons I like them, because it's double the fun to make them. So here is one I prepared earlier. So you can see we've got a card on the bottom and then we've got another smaller card on the top. And this card has the fold on the right hand side, which is different to a normal card. And once you've got your card in that orientation, the back panel of it then glues to the inside of your larger card. You can make these any shape and size you like. You can make rectangular ones, you can make square ones, you can have them so they sit like this. You can make ones with triangular flaps. I'll show you one of those at the end. All sorts of things. And I'm going to be using 2 different suites for the cards today. I'm going to use the Abigail Rose suite and this one, which is Sun Prints. I'm using quite a lot of paper on these, largely because I'm a bit of a paper collector and I have an awful lot in my stash at the moment. And it seemed like an ideal opportunity to use it up. However, you can, of course, stamp all these panels. You don't have to use any patterned paper at all if you don't want to. I'll be giving you measurements for the card base, both of them for each card that I make. The card bases, perhaps I should have said. I haven't given you exact measurements for the layers because that's really where you can start to do your own thing. In every case on the cards I'm doing today, I've come down 1/4 of an inch on each layer. So this patterned paper layer is 1/4 of an inch smaller than the card base panel that it's sitting on. But you can make that 1/8 of an inch, you can make it 1/2 an inch, depending on what you want it to look like. And you can add more layers than I have, or you can add fewer layers. So they're a really, really flexible card. Once you're clear on how they come together, then you can really add your own stamp. I was going to say that. It's a bit of a bad pun, isn't it? But you know what I mean. All right, so let's make one this size, which is small enough to be manageable the first time you do it. Right, let me just pull out the bits that I'm going to be using for that. Here we are. So these are the card base measurements I'm using. So I think of it as a large card base and a small card base. Lots and lots of pieces here. Okay, let's get them in some kind of organisation. So this is my large card base. So this measures 4 inches by 8 3/4 of an inch, and I've scored it landscape, so with a long side at the top at 3 inches. So this gives me a card base with one large section and one smaller section, and the smaller section is what allows me to add a second card in like this. So that's my large card base. Then my smaller card base is 3 inches by 8 inches. So 3 inches tall by 8 inches across, and I've scored it landscape, so with the long edge at the top at 4 inches. So these two sections will just fit together nicely. Now I could have made this one a little bit taller if I'd wanted. I could have made it a little bit wider, but those are the sizes I've settled on. So the first thing I'm going to do is start to put the layers onto my larger card base. Now the paper I'm using is from the Abigail Rose pack. It's beautiful paper. The neutral colour in it is vanilla rather than white, very vanilla. And there are a couple of browns, Early Espresso and Crumb Cake. There is a grey, which is, I'm just checking on the pack, Smoky Slate. And there's this kind of salmon pink, which is called Petal Pink. So very soft, pretty colours. The designs are some florals and some slightly more geometric ones. And the dies are fantastic. They cut out quite a lot of the designs on the patterned paper, as well as some of the designs from the stamp set. So here I'm just layering Early Espresso card, which, as I mentioned, is cut to 1/4 of an inch smaller on the width and the height than the panels that I'm putting it on, and then the patterned paper is another 1/4 of an inch smaller. And you can mix and match the patterns as much as you like with this design. If you've got a Stampin' Up paper pack, then all those designs are going to coordinate beautifully. This is one of my absolute favourites in there. I'm hoping it will show on the camera. It's like an old-fashioned ledger print, so I really like that. And I think it's fun to put something on the front and the back of all the panels, but you don't have to. You could leave some of the card plain. As I mentioned, you could use stamped pieces instead of patterned paper. You could use card that's gone through an embossing folder. So there's lots of options for this. Alright, so this is my large card base finished now. When I cut the paper for inside, I did cut it so that the design continues across like that. I decided that with the lines it would be better if that kind of matched across. So that's my large card base. Now let's work on the small one. So I need to remember that my fold for this one is going to be on the right hand side, not on the left as usual. And then I've got lots of pieces here. So this is going to go inside. That's going to be my panel for writing on. This is going to be my contrast for in there, and then I'm going to do something else on the front, which I will show you shortly. So I'm not going to glue in my piece for writing on just yet until I've got that one finished. I've got a little bit more to add to that. And I've kept my stripes here vertical so that they are the same as those. Mary, how is the sound now? Is that any more consistent for you? I have had problems with my sound coming and going once or twice recently. I haven't managed to replicate the problem when I've been testing, which is a bit frustrating. Sometimes it seems to be something to do with the internet signals. In the past I've had problems in the interface between uploading between Facebook and YouTube, so who knows, frankly. Alright, so for the front of what's actually going to end up being the focal point on my card, I've cut a section of this design. I'll show you the whole piece of paper in just a minute, and coloured it. So this is the paper design. I really love this. And the design is very pale here, so you can leave it like this, or you can colour it. And I've used my stamping blends to colour in a section of this. Oh great, thank you Mary, good. Well, let's hope that continues better than it was. And if I pick that up, let me just put it against this darker card so it's a little bit clearer to see maybe. I'm really rubbish at holding this in the right place. There we go, I think you can see that. So I've used my Petal Pink and Mint Macaron and So Saffron Stamping Blends markers for this. These two in the middle I'm going to do a little bit of decoupage on, so I've coloured just around the edge in case any of that underneath design shows when I finished, but I haven't bothered colouring the whole thing because most of it's going to be covered over. And this is a really nice tulip design on the front, which I think is perfect for spring. So then I've got two more little scraps of paper here, which are the same sections of the design as these two flowers in the middle. And I'm going to grab my stamping blends and just colour those flowers in. So I've got the dark one and the light one. I always open these away from my clothes and away from my work, because sometimes they are so juicy that the ink will spatter when the lid comes off. The lids are very close fitting because as these are alcohol ink markers, the alcohol in them evaporates if it's in contact with the air, so they're very tightly capped. But sometimes it requires a little bit of force to actually take the caps off, and that can spatter the ink when these are very juicy. So I always hold them away from me. So this is the darker one, which I picked up by mistake. Let's go back to the lighter one. There we go. I usually start with the lighter one. It's not wrong to start with the darker one, but I just like to start with the lighter one. And I colour the whole area, generously laying down the ink, because these blend best when you're blending wet ink into wet ink. So I'm now going over just the shading lines on this design with the darker marker. It's very subtle because this is actually a very pale pink, but you can see the shading just a little bit. And because I want to work wet into wet, I'm only doing a small area at a time. Otherwise the ink will have dried, and then the darker colour won't blend so much as just form a darker area. Now if I was using a darker colour, I would come back on top of that dark colour with the pale and just colour over a little bit to help it blend. But these are so pale that I don't need to do that. I'm going to do this tulip and then I will come back and do those stamens. I love colouring. I always have. I had adult colouring books even before they were a thing, but they were very, very difficult to find. And now I have quite a collection. And I love to colour in my stamped images as well. So again, I'm laying down the light one first, and then I'm just going over that shading that's already in the design for me using the darker marker. And if I was using a darker colour, I would come back over the shaded, the darker areas with the light one just around the edges, just to help blend in that boundary between the dark and the light. And then this is my dark So Saffron marker, and I'm just going to colour in the stamens which are in the centre of this more open tulip. There we are. So that's my two little scraps, and I'm now going to cut out those flower heads. I don't want the stems or anything else, I only want the flower head. As always, when I'm cutting out small things, I'm keeping my scissors still. Obviously I open and close them, but beyond that I'm not moving this hand like that. I'm keeping my right hand still, and I'm moving the paper with my left hand. And if that isn't a way of cutting that you've tried before, I encourage you to give it a go. It might feel a bit weird to start with, but with a little bit of practice, it makes fussy cutting so much easier. And I have my scissors at a 45-degree angle to the paper I'm cutting, so I'm not holding them upright like that, I'm holding them at a 45-degree angle, which again makes it easier. It's easier to see what I'm doing. Thank you for the hearts. Always nice to see them come flooding up the screen. And there we are. That's my 2 little tulip flowers cut out. And now I'm ready to finish off the main focal panel of my card. So first of all, I'm going to glue this larger piece of paper onto the contrast card. And glue that onto what's going to be my card front. Again, making sure I've got the fold on the right hand side of this smaller card. And then I'm going to use my bone folder just to give these flowers a little bit of shape. If you watched me last week, I was shaping some leaves and I was a little bit enthusiastic and actually ripped one of the leaves off. So let's try not to tear anything today. There we are. So I've just given those a little bit of curl. It just means that when they're glued down, they don't kind of sit there like little flat pancake pieces. So now I'm going to pop down some dimensionals, my foam pads. Now I know the pieces I'm adding are exactly the same size as the flowers on the paper, so as long as I stay within the flowers, I will not be able to see my foam pads. That one was a little bit big. Let's put a mini one there and a mini one there. And let's put one more mini one there. There we are. I always use plenty of foam pads. They're inexpensive, and I know then that even if this goes through the rollers of the post office machinery, the card won't get squashed because the paper pieces will be well supported from below. Now it's just a case of laying this piece over the top, matching the shapes and sticking it down. You can do this with stamped images too. Just stamp your image on your card, then stamp another image on scrap card and cut it out exactly as I did with the patterned paper. I'll try and show you the dimension on this. Easy that is for you to see. Alright, so now I've got my 2 cards. Hi Antriana, you're sneaking a peek whilst at work. That's okay, I won't tell anyone. Alright, so my cards are going to sit like this. So I just need to glue the back panel of this one inside here, and if I center it top to bottom and left to right with these dimensions of the card, then it will be in exactly the right place for the card to fold over the top of it. There we are. Ooh, and I've moved that. Let's just slide that. That's better, much better straight. Now, the only thing I need to do now is just add a little bit of decoration to the front and my panel inside. So I've got some vanilla card here, and I've got one of the stamps from the coordinating stamp set. I've got this one here with the 3 flowers, and I'm just going to stamp a flower on here. There isn't a flower which is obviously a tulip, but I think these are pretty much like an open tulip. So I've inked that just so one of the flowers has been inked. And I'm just going to pop that in the corner. There we are. I didn't want all three because this is a very tiny panel. Put that out of the way. And now I can glue this inside ready to write on. Thank you, Antriana. I'm glad you like it. And then I wanted some kind of wording on the front. So I decided that I would do a Get Well card because my stash of Get Well cards has been a bit depleted recently. I could do with a few new ones. So again, from the same stamp set, there's this one here which says Feel Better Real Soon. You probably know our stamps are made in America, and I'm sure in America they do say Feel Better Real Soon, but that doesn't really feel like the kind of thing I would say. So I performed surgery on my stamp and I cut out the bit that says real. I've kept it in case I ever need it. And then I now have a stamp that says Feel Better Soon, which feels like much more the kind of thing that I would say. So I'm going to stamp it on a little scrap of vanilla card and then cut it out. Rather than have it on an oval or a circle or a little rectangle, I thought it would be fun to actually cut around the words. As I'm on a bit of a fussy cutting roll this afternoon. So I'm not going very close to the letters. I'm just leaving a kind of a border around. But it's just a fun thing to do for a bit of a change, I think. So I'm trying to keep the edges round rather than have kind of square corners because it's a very loopy font for the cursive part of the words. There we are. So I have, oops, Feel Better Soon. And let me just decide where to pop that. So there's space for it there, or there's space for it there. I'm thinking there is better, I think. And I'm going to pop that up on some dimensionals as well. Is. And then I just feel it needs a little bit of something blingy somewhere. I've got some pearls. Here we are. Oop, this one's come off on my finger. Large ones, and then I've got some perhaps I'll use medium. I've got large, medium and small because that's what comes in the packs. So let's pop a medium one there, and I'll do the same diagonally opposite, and And then just to kind of make them look like they belong, I'm going to pop them on this panel that goes on the front as well. Should have left a little bit more space there with my word, but never mind. Okay, so let me pick that up and show you close to. Thank you, Karen. Yes, it's you have to take a bit of a deep breath to to trim a bit off your stamp. But the thing is, as long as you keep the bit, you can always replace it how it was. And I always resist trimming the bit I cut out because it will actually fit perfectly back in, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle piece. So if I ever do want to stamp that whole thing again, let me just show you. I can do, because that will just fit in there. There we are. So it stamps as if I'd never snipped it up. So yeah, I do that. I do that occasionally with my stamps. Sometimes there's one that I just think I can't have that word there. Sometimes you have to mask it if it's not somewhere that you can easily snip it out and leave the rest of the stamp unscathed. But sometimes you can get rid of a bit that you know you're never going to use. Right, let me stamp these. Not stamp these, clean these even. Clean these and put them out of the way. So put those two side by side there. So same design, same sizes, but different sweets. They do look quite different in different colours. All right, so that's my rectangular one. I'm just going to make a little bit of space, and then I'm going to bring in a larger one, which works in exactly the same way. It's just a larger card, and it's a square instead of a rectangle. So if you saw the event cover photo on Facebook, then you will have seen this one. So you can see it works in exactly the same way. It's a card attached to another card. So this again is the Abigail Rose paper. I've stamped this flower cluster on some of that ledger paper that comes in the paper pack, so there's just a subtle pattern to it. I made another Get Well card, now I've got two, hooray! And the paper on this is just beautiful. That's a bit out the top. Let me bring it back in, there you are. But other than that, very similar. So let's make one of those. I'll give you the measurements first of all. I'll run through them in a second. Just make sure that you can read my writing. Pull out all these other bits and pieces. There we are. So my large card base on this, which is this one, is 8 5/8 of an inch by 5 3/4 of an inch. And I've scored it, again, landscape long side at the top at 2 7/8 of an inch. So I'm sorry to throw some 7/8 in for you there. I wanted to make a 5 3/4 of an inch square card because I've got some envelopes that will fit that. So that entailed some 1/8 of an inch in there. The small card base is 4 inches by 8 inches, so scored at 4. Excuse me. All right, so I'll bring in my bits and pieces here. So I've gone back to the Sun Prince suite. For this, I've got some pre-cut pieces there. So I've used white as my contrast card for this, because this paper is all blues. There's three, I think, three different blues with white. And it looks like the cyanotype printing, which you may have done at some point. You can get special paper and you lay things on it. In this case, they've laid botanicals onto the cyanotype paper and you put it in sunshine. And there's a chemical reaction when the sunshine hits the paper. And when that's finished and you remove whatever it is you've put on there, then you get these silhouette shapes in white. You could put anything on there. You could put on nuts and bolts and spanners. Die cut shapes in card, anything at all. But they are particularly beautiful, I think, with pressed flowers and leaves. So once again, my layers just go down 1/4 inch each time from the one before. I did actually write down all the sizes of all the layers ready for this, and then I looked and there were just so many measurements there. I thought you're not going to make head nor tail of them, so I think it's actually easier to understand if I just give you the card base sizes and then tell you to cut each layer 1/4 inch smaller than the one it's on top of. I hope that's clearer anyway. Here we go. And once again, I cut these two pieces continuously, if you like, from the paper so that the design flows across. So that's the inside of my large card base. And this is the front left panel. Hard sometimes, isn't it, to glue down and hide one side of the design. I decided to stick with the blues on this card and not use any of the grey. So that's my large card. I'll set that one aside and work on the smaller card now. So I've got it set up with the fold on the right hand side. If you're making these, definitely just check that you've got that the right way round before you start. It will save a lot of heartache if you discover later that you've spent ages carefully decorating the panel that you're actually going to glue to the larger card. These are all my inside layers. My one for writing on, so I'm going to keep this one aside because I need to do a little bit of stamping on that before it goes in. I don't think I said, but the blue I'm using with this is Night of Navy. The other two blues in the paper pack are Starry Sky and Pacific Point. So this really is a simple card. If it looks complicated when you first see it, I hope you can now see that it's really not. It's mostly just layering. Mary, I've just seen your question, so hopefully I answered that just now, that yes, it was, it's Night of Navy. Okay, so that one needs doing, and also my decoration for what will be the front. So for this I used the Stylish Shapes dies. I hope you've all got these in your craft stash, and if you haven't, honestly order them, they're fantastic. Stitched dies in squares, circles and 2 different sizes of banners, and they layer like a dream, and they're just so nice and they're so useful. I've used and used and used mine. Stylish Shapes, really fantastic dies. So I've got a spare one there in case I messed something up. And I'm going to stamp some words on here. So this stamp says a heartfelt thank you here. Now I could, if I didn't want a heartfelt on there, if I just wanted it to say thank you, I could actually snip that off in exactly the same way as I did the previous stamp I showed you, but just occasionally I can see that I might use that. For today I just want thank you, so I'm actually going to use some washi tape to mask that off with. If you haven't got washi tape, which is a low tack paper tape, then just use some masking tape, or a strip of the sticky part of a post-it note will do it as well. So on my clean rubber stamp I've just covered over the bit that I don't want. I'm now going to ink it very carefully, and I'm actually going to take the ink pad to this rather than pick this up and take it to the ink pad, because I don't want that washi tape to drop off, and it is low tack tape. And then this is really important, take the washi tape off before you stamp. Sometimes I forget, and then all the ink on that washi tape stamps onto my project. So remember to take the washi tape off. There we are. And then I've got thank you. I always need thank you cards. I'm going to stamp this slightly to the right because I've got something to add on the left. There we go. And you can see that I've just got part of that stamp rather than the whole thing. And again, you can do that on any stamps at all. Alright, so now I can layer this on here. You can see I've got a little flower there, which is from the Nature's Prints stamp set. That's the one that coordinates with the paper, and there are dies as well. So I stamped that on a scrap of card, there's the image, and cut it out with the die, which is much easier to do separately beforehand rather than trying to fit my die cutting machine under the camera when I've got everything else on my desk. Occasionally I do, but generally I die cut in advance for that reason. And then I'm going to pop this on the front as my focal point. Try and get it straight. And then I'm going to add this little flower down the side. And just bring it in slightly on a diagonal like that. And then for my inside sentiment panel, I've got that same stamp, and I'm just going to stamp that to one side. So I'm using Night of Navy ink because then that coordinates perfectly with the card. And now all that remains is for me to stick this inside. And once again, if I stick this centrally to the large panel of the larger card, then the other panels will all fold on top and interlock as they're supposed to. I did pull out my little dragonfly trinkets. I was wondering about putting a dragonfly on here. Now it's obviously completely out of scale with that flower, but I did think the silver might be quite nice. Don't know, what do you think? Or the alternative is some good old rhinestones. It needs a little something to lift it, I think. Something shiny. So dragonfly or rhinestones, tell me what you think. Mary's saying she likes the colours and papers. Yeah, I think it's beautiful, Mary, isn't it? And I think they're actually great for a masculine design, even if you wanted to use the florals. They're not too girly flowers, but of course you can see from these there are lots of contrasting patterns which work brilliantly for masculine cards as well. So Karen's saying dragonfly. Any other offers? I like the dragonfly. Let's go with the dragonfly. Thank you, Karen. So if you were thinking rhinestone, you're too late. So I'm using a mini glue dot. Oh, and Mary says dragonfly too. Excellent. And I'm just kind of hooking in the edges of the glue dot just so they don't overhang the dragonfly. They're so strong, these glue dots, and it will work with the weight of this little metal charm. Okay, let's pop that on there. There we go. Good choice, ladies. It really catches the light. I'm not sure it's showing up, but it does. It's beautiful on there. So there we are. That's another one with the same but different. And again, they look completely different, although they're exactly the same size and the same shape and card fold as well. I think they just about fit on, don't they, if I do that with them. So if you haven't made one of these, I hope you will give them a go. I think they're a really nice card style. It's one I come back to again and again if I want to do something that is a fancy fold but isn't too complicated and doesn't require a huge amount of measuring and scoring. With this, you're just making 2 cards, remembering to put one on with the fold at the right, so the smaller card goes on with the fold at the right, and it's a complete card if you like. Both the front and the back panels are the same size as each other, and then the larger card that it sits on, your left hand panel, is cut away slightly to allow this panel to fold over the top. You could of course have this panel extending much further across if you wanted. As long as you've got the clearance for this one to fold over, it will work fine. So you can play around with sizes and shapes as much as you like. So before I say goodbye, I'm just going to quickly show you a couple of stamp sets that I'm using in next week's Stampin' Chat Live, because I'm doing cards where words are the main feature next week. So this has been a favourite for ages. This is Biggest Wish, and I'm also going to use Kind and Sincere. So this is in the mini catalogue, this is in the annual catalogue. So if you'd like to play along with me, have a look in your stash, see if you've got some stamps where you've got some larger scale words where they can become the main feature, if you like. Let me cover you over just while I bring the camera back up so I can see you properly to say goodbye. Okay, let's get rid of the mirror imaging. So yes, I'm up the right way. Hooray. Okay, brilliant. There we are. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm sorry about the technical hitch earlier where I knocked the tripod over. I will try not to do that next week. It was all going so well too, but never mind. Have a lovely weekend, however you're spending it. I hope the sun shines on you, and I will see you again next Friday. Bye-bye.